Berlin, April 23, 1945. Soviet Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov watches his T-34 explode. The tank erupts in a fountain of white-hot metal, turret spinning 30 feet into the air. Inside, 4 men burn alive. The killer isn't another tank or artillery piece. It's a 14-year-old Hitler Youth member holding a crude metal tube worth 8 Reichsmarks. In the final months of World War II, the Panzerfaust becomes the Red Army's nightmare. Soviet forces lose more tanks to these handheld weapons in urban combat than to all German armor combined. On a single day during the Battle of Berlin, April 21, 1945, the 1st Belarusian Front reports 73 T-34 tanks destroyed. 61 fall to Panzerfausts fired from basements, upper floors, and rubble piles at ranges under 50 meters. The statistics tell a horrifying story. Soviet tank crews operating in German cities face a 73% casualty rate. Average crew survival time after entering urban combat zones drops to 11 hours. The Red Army's advantage in armor means nothing when a single Volksgrenadier hiding in a cellar can destroy a 40-ton tank with a weapon requiring 0 training. General Georgy Zhukov's staff calculates the mathematics of catastrophe. At current loss rates, the drive to capture Berlin will cost over 2,000 tanks. That represents 18,000 trained crewmen. The Soviet Union has the tanks. It has the men. But even Stalin's willingness to spend lives has limits when the war is already won. What Soviet tankers don't know as they weld crude metal screens to their vehicles is that their improvised solution will become standard equipment on armored vehicles for the next 80 years. They don't know that their desperate field modification, mocked by engineers and dismissed by officers, will save more lives than any official armor upgrade developed during the entire war. This is the story of how frontline soldiers solved a problem that killed thousands, how the Red Army bureaucracy nearly stopped them, and how a simple idea born in a Berlin street would transform armored warfare forever. The weapon appears in July 1943. German factories begin mass production of the Panzerfaust 30, a revolutionary anti-tank weapon so simple that a factory worker can assemble one in under 6 minutes. The name means armor fist, and it delivers exactly that, a shaped charge warhead capable of penetrating 200 millimeters of armor at 30 meters range. The Panzerfaust costs 8 Reichsmarks to manufacture. A Panther tank costs 117,000 Reichsmarks. The mathematics favor Germany, but only in defensive urban warfare where the weapon's limitations disappear. The single-shot tube requires no training. Aim, remove safety pin, press trigger. The rocket motor fires, launching the warhead at 45 meters per second. On impact, the shaped charge creates a jet of superheated metal traveling at 8,000 meters per second, burning through steel like a blowtorch through butter. Soviet armor doctrine has no answer. The T-34's sloped armor, revolutionary in 1941, means nothing against shaped charges that defeat armor through thermal penetration rather than kinetic impact. Tank commanders try everything. They order infantry to advance ahead of tanks. But German defenders simply wait until tanks pass before emerging from hiding. They attempt to suppress buildings with machine gun fire. But Panzerfaust operators need only 3 seconds of exposure time to aim and fire. The Red Army's technical bureaus propose solutions. Engineers design additional armor plates, but the weight reduces mobility and the plates still can't stop shaped charges at close range. They develop standoff armor concepts, but manufacturing and installation would take months. They suggest smoke dispensers, but smoke screens are useless when the enemy fires from 10 meters away. By January 1945, German factories have produced over 6 million Panzerfausts. The weapon floods to the front lines. Every Volksgrenadier company receives 30. Hitler Youth units get 50. Even administrative personnel in Berlin receive basic training. The weapon democratizes anti-tank warfare, transforming every German soldier into a potential tank killer. The Soviet advance into Germany transforms into a meat grinder. In the town of Kustrin, February 1945, the 1st Guards Tank Army loses 47 tanks in 3 days of urban combat. Post-battle analysis reveals that 41 fell to Panzerfausts. The crews never saw their killers. In Breslau, surrounded German defenders destroy 93 Soviet tanks during a 2-month siege. The Panzerfaust accounts for 78 kills. Soviet tank commanders develop desperate tactics. They order crews to button up completely, accepting reduced visibility. Casualties increase as blind tanks drive into obstacles and ambushes. They try using captured German prisoners as human shields on tank hulls, but the practice proves both ineffective and creates discipline problems. Some units refuse to enter cities at all, requesting artillery to level entire districts before advancing. The expert consensus among Soviet armor officers becomes clear. Urban combat against Panzerfaust-equipped defenders is unsustainable. Major General Mikhail Katukov, commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army, submits a report to Stavka stating that continuing current tactics will result in the destruction of his entire force before reaching Berlin's center. He recommends bypassing cities entirely, accepting slower progress to preserve armor strength. But bypassing cities is impossible. Berlin must fall. Vienna must fall. Prague must fall. The war cannot end until Soviet flags fly over these capitals. The Red Army needs a solution, and it needs one immediately. Official channels offer nothing but theoretical designs requiring months to implement. The answer comes not from Moscow's design bureaus, but from a junior sergeant who spent his pre-war years as a factory metalworker in Stalingrad. Sergeant Nikolai Yegorov has 0 engineering credentials. His formal education ended at age 14 when he left school to work in the Stalingrad tractor factory. Before the war, he welded agricultural equipment. His military training consists of 6 weeks at a tank crew replacement depot. He holds no technical certifications, has never attended a military academy, and possesses exactly the kind of practical knowledge that Soviet bureaucracy routinely ignores. But Yegorov has something the engineers in Moscow don't have. He's watching his friends die. April 18, 1945. Outskirts of Berlin. Yegorov's tank company loses 3 T-34s in the morning attack. All 3 fall to Panzerfausts, fired from apartment buildings. The crews burn. Yegorov, a loader in Lieutenant Volkov's tank, helps pull charred bodies from the wrecks. One corpse is his bunkmate from training, a Ukrainian kid named Petro, who talked constantly about his mother's cooking. That evening, Yegorov walks through a destroyed German supply depot. Among the rubble, he finds bed frames. Not ordinary beds, but metal spring mattresses with heavy-gauge wire mesh. The springs stand 8 inches off the base frame, creating a gap. Yegorov stares at the bed springs for several minutes. The insight hits him like physical force. The Panzerfaust's shaped charge needs direct contact with armor to achieve maximum penetration. If the warhead detonates before touching the hull, the superheated jet dissipates across the gap, losing energy. The bed springs could act as sacrificial armor, triggering premature detonation. Yegorov brings his idea to Lieutenant Volkov that night. Volkov, a veteran of Kursk and Lvov, listens without interrupting. When Yegorov finishes, Volkov asks a single question. How much does this bed spring weigh? Maybe 40 kilograms for full coverage, Comrade Lieutenant. And it won't interfere with the gun traverse? We mount it away from moving parts. Volkov nods slowly. Show me. The next morning, Yegorov and 3 other crew members scavenge bed frames from destroyed buildings. They find wire cutters in an abandoned hardware store. Working in a bombed-out garage, they cut the springs into sections and begin welding them to their T-34's hull using a portable welding kit from the company's maintenance truck. The work takes 6 hours. They create a cage of metal springs surrounding the tank's hull, standing roughly 20 centimeters off the armor. The result looks absurd, like a tank wearing a wire mesh dress. Other crews stop to watch, making jokes. Someone calls it a hedgehog. Another suggests Yegorov is building a chicken coop. Captain Dmitry Sokolov, the company commander, arrives at noon. He stares at the modified tank in silence for a full minute. "Sergeant Yegorov," he finally says, his voice carefully neutral. "What exactly are you doing to Army property?" "Improving survivability, Comrade Captain." "With bed springs?" "Yes, Comrade Captain." Sokolov walks around the tank, examining the welded springs. "This is not authorized by any technical manual." "No, Comrade Captain. In fact, this is explicitly forbidden. Unauthorized modifications to combat vehicles violate Article 47 of military regulations." Yegorov stands at attention, saying nothing. Captain Sokolov makes a decision that could end his career. "We test it tonight. If it fails, you remove every piece of this metal before dawn. If it works," he pauses. "If it works, we discuss it with the battalion commander." The testing ground is a destroyed factory complex on Berlin's outskirts. Sokolov's company has captured 4 Panzerfausts from a supply cache. At 2300 hours, under cover of darkness, they position Yegorov's modified T-34 behind a concrete wall. A volunteer crew boards the tank, though Yegorov insists on being inside for the test. The first Panzerfaust fires from 30 meters. The rocket streaks across the darkness, striking the tank's side screen. The warhead detonates with a sharp crack. Inside the tank, the crew feels the impact as a heavy thud, but no penetration. Yegorov examines the damage. The springs are blown away in a meter-wide section, but the hull armor shows only scorching, no penetration. "Again," Sokolov orders. The second Panzerfaust strikes the front screen. Same result. Detonation, destroyed springs, intact armor. The third test targets the turret cage. The warhead explodes against the wire mesh, and again the armor holds. Lieutenant Volkov climbs out of the tank, his face pale but grinning. "It works. God help us, it actually works." By dawn, every tank in the company has crews scavenging bed springs. The welding continues throughout the day. Yegorov moves from tank to tank, supervising installation, ensuring the screens maintain proper standoff distance. The company's appearance transforms. 21 T-34s now wear crude wire cages, looking less like military vehicles and more like mobile scrapyards. The battalion commander, Major Andrei Petrov, arrives at 1400 hours. He stares at the modified tanks in disbelief. "Who authorized this circus?" Sokolov steps forward. "I did, Comrade Major. The modification works. We conducted live fire tests with captured Panzerfausts." "You conducted unauthorized testing with enemy weapons on Soviet military equipment?" "Yes, Comrade Major." Petrov's face darkens. "Captain Sokolov, you understand this is a court-martial offense? You've violated procurement regulations, safety protocols, and chain of command. These contraptions make our tanks look like refugee carts. They also stop Panzerfausts, Comrade Major." "According to what? Your amateur testing? Where are the engineering reports, the materials analysis, the approval from the main armored directorate?" Petrov's voice rises. "This is exactly the kind of undisciplined innovation that gets men killed. You think you're smarter than the engineers in Moscow. I think we're dying in Berlin, Comrade Major." The words hang in the air. Around them, tank crews stop working, watching the confrontation. Petrov steps closer to Sokolov, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Remove these modifications immediately. That is a direct order. If I see a single bed spring on a tank in this battalion tomorrow morning, you will face charges. Sokolov salutes. Yes, Comrade Major. Petrov storms away. The crews stand in stunned silence. Then Lieutenant Volkov speaks quietly. We're not removing them. The confrontation reaches General Vasily Chuikov within 24 hours. Commander of the 8th Guards Army, Chuikov built his reputation at Stalingrad through unconventional tactics and willingness to ignore doctrine when survival demanded it. On April 21, 1945, he summons Major Petrov, Captain Sokolov, and Sergeant Yegorov to his forward headquarters in a captured German school building. The meeting room fills with staff officers. Colonel Viktor Ivanov from the main Armored Directorate has arrived specifically to address what he calls the bed spring incident. Ivanov represents everything Chuikov despises: a Moscow bureaucrat who hasn't seen combat since 1941, a man who values regulations over results. Ivanov opens the meeting. Comrades, we face a crisis of discipline. Unauthorized modifications undermine the entire Soviet armor development system. If every sergeant with a welding torch starts redesigning tanks, we descend into chaos. Chuikov lights a cigarette. How many tanks have we lost to Panzerfausts this week, Colonel? That's not the point, Comrade General. Answer the question. Ivanov shuffles papers. Preliminary reports indicate approximately 130 tanks across the Army group. And how many men? Estimated 520 casualties, dead and wounded. Chuikov turns to Yegorov. Sergeant, explain your modification. Yegorov, standing rigidly at attention, describes the concept. Standoff armor, premature detonation, dissipated jet penetration. He speaks in simple terms, using his hands to illustrate the principle. The room erupts. Colonel Ivanov interrupts. This is absurd. The sergeant describes spaced armor, a concept we've studied extensively. The main Armored Directorate rejected it due to weight considerations and manufacturing complexity. Now we're supposed to believe that bed springs accomplish what our engineers determined was impossible. We tested it, Sokolov says quietly. Unauthorized testing proves nothing. Where are the controlled conditions, the metallurgical analysis, the statistical validation? Major Petrov speaks up and his words surprise everyone. Comrade Colonel, I witnessed the modifications yesterday. I ordered their removal. But last night, my battalion entered the Tempelhof district. Captain Sokolov's company encountered heavy Panzerfaust fire. They lost 0 tanks. The company adjacent to them, with standard armor, lost 6. Silence falls over the room. That's anecdotal evidence, Ivanov protests. Meaningless from a scientific standpoint. Tell that to the 30 men who came home alive, Petrov says. Chuikov stubs out his cigarette. Colonel Ivanov, I respect the main Armored Directorate's expertise. I understand the importance of proper testing protocols. But we're not in a laboratory. We're in Berlin, and my men are burning alive in their tanks. He stands, walking to a wall map. I need a solution today, not a research proposal for next month. Comrade General, I must protest. This sets a dangerous precedent. Your protest is noted. Chuikov turns to Yegorov. Sergeant, how long to modify a tank? 6 to 8 hours, Comrade General, depending on available materials. How many welders do we have in the Army? A staff officer checks a roster. Approximately 400 trained welders across maintenance companies. Chuikov does the mathematics in his head. We can modify the entire Army's tank force in under a week. He looks at Ivanov. Colonel, you will provide technical oversight to standardize the installation process. I want specifications written today. Sergeant Yegorov will assist you. Comrade General, I must formally object. Your objection is noted and overruled. Chuikov's voice hardens. This army has lost enough men to German wonder weapons. If bed springs save lives, we will weld bed springs to every tank from here to the Reichstag. Is that clear? Ivanov's face flushes red. Yes, Comrade General. Good. Captain Sokolov, you're promoted to Major Effective immediately. Take command of the modification program. Major Petrov, you'll coordinate with Army maintenance units. I want progress reports every 6 hours. Before we continue with how this desperate innovation changed armored warfare forever, I need to ask for your help. This channel survives on your support. If you're finding value in these forgotten stories of battlefield innovation, please hit the like button and subscribe. It takes 2 seconds and helps us bring you more content like this. Now, let's see what happened when Yegorov's bed springs met German Panzerfausts in actual combat. April 23, 1945, 0530 hours. The assault on the Reichstag district begins. Major Sokolov's tank battalion, now fully equipped with improvised screen armor, leads the advance down Wilhelmstrasse. Every T-34 wears its cage of welded springs and wire mesh. The tankers have nicknamed the modification Yegorov's Fence. The German defenders are waiting. Volkssturm units and SS remnants have fortified every building with Panzerfaust firing positions. The Red Army's intelligence estimates over 3,000 Panzerfausts remain in central Berlin's defense sector. Lieutenant Volkov's tank rounds a corner at 0547 hours. A Panzerfaust fires from a second-story window 15 meters away. The rocket strikes the screen armor on the tank's left side. The warhead detonates with a sharp crack, blowing away a section of wire mesh. Inside, Yegorov feels the impact jar through the hull. Hit left side, he reports calmly. Armor intact. Volkov traverses the turret. The 85mm gun fires, the high explosive shell obliterating the window and the Panzerfaust operator behind it. The tank continues forward. Over the next 4 hours, Volkov's tank takes 6 more Panzerfaust hits. Each time, the screen armor detonates the warhead prematurely. Each time, the crew survives. By 1,000 hours, the tank looks like a wounded animal, trailing pieces of destroyed wire mesh. But the hull armor shows only scorch marks and minor denting. The statistics tell an extraordinary story. Sokolov's battalion enters Berlin with 43 operational tanks. After 3 days of the heaviest urban combat of the war, they report 39 tanks still operational. 4 tanks lost, all to mines or artillery, none to Panzerfausts. The battalion records 47 confirmed Panzerfaust hits on screen armor. Not one achieves penetration. Compare this to the 79th Tank Brigade, operating in the same sector with standard armor. They begin with 38 tanks. After 3 days, 17 remain operational. 21 tanks destroyed, 18 by Panzerfausts. The casualty rates tell an even starker story. Sokolov's battalion, 11 men killed, 23 wounded. The 79th Brigade, 84 men killed, 71 wounded. The German perspective reveals the psychological impact. SS Unterscharführer Hans Weber, captured on April 25th, describes the frustration. We fired at the Soviet tanks as we always did. The Panzerfaust hit. We heard the explosion, but the tank kept coming. We fired again. Same result. It was like shooting at ghosts. The warheads exploded against some kind of metal cage, and the tanks just kept advancing. We realized our most effective weapon was useless. Another German defender, Volkssturm member Friedrich Müller, age 53, recorded in his diary, April 24th, the Russian tanks now wear strange wire screens. Our Panzerfausts explode against them without effect. The young boys who were so confident yesterday are terrified today. They see the rockets hit, see the explosions, but the tanks continue. Some boys are refusing to engage anymore. They say it's pointless. The modification spreads across the entire First Belarusian front. General Zhukov, initially skeptical, reviews the combat reports and issues orders for immediate implementation Army-wide. By April 27th, over 800 Soviet tanks wear improvised screen armor. The materials vary: bed springs, wire mesh, metal fencing, even chain link salvaged from German factories. The principle remains constant: standoff distance to trigger premature detonation. The final assault on the Reichstag, April 30, 1945. The 150th Rifle Division's supporting tank company uses 9 T-34s equipped with Yegorov screens. They advance across the Königsplatz under intense fire. German defenders fire 23 Panzerfausts at ranges under 30 meters. The screen armor defeats 21 hits. 2 tanks suffer damage when Panzerfausts strike areas without screen coverage, but both remain mobile. Senior Sergeant Pyotr Sherbina, commanding one of the Reichstag assault tanks, later describes the moment. "We drove straight at them. They fired their Panzerfausts, and we heard the explosions against the screens, but we kept going. The Germans' faces. I could see their faces through the vision slits. They looked terrified. Their wonder weapon wasn't working anymore." The numbers validate Yegorov's innovation beyond any doubt. Post-war Soviet analysis calculates that screen armor reduced Panzerfaust effectiveness by 87%. In the final 2 weeks of the Berlin operation, tanks equipped with improvised screens suffered a casualty rate of 9% compared to 43% for unmodified tanks. The modification saved an estimated 450 tanks and 1,800 crew members' lives during the Battle of Berlin alone. The Red Army's own testing, conducted in May 1945 after the war's end, confirms the field results. Engineers' fire captured Panzerfausts at T-34s with standardized screen armor. At ranges under 50 meters, the screens achieve an 89% defeat rate against shaped charge warheads. The standoff distance of 20 centimeters proves optimal, allowing the jet to dissipate energy before reaching the main armor. German technical intelligence, captured after the war, reveals that Wehrmacht commanders recognized the problem immediately. A report dated April 26, 1945, from the Berlin Defense Command states, "Soviet tanks now employ wire cage armor that significantly reduces Panzerfaust effectiveness. Recommend firing only at tracks or rear aspects where screens are absent. Multiple simultaneous hits may overwhelm the protection." But by late April 1945, Germany lacks the resources and trained personnel for such sophisticated tactics. The Panzerfaust, which terrorized Soviet tankers for months, becomes largely ineffective in the war's final days. Before we conclude this remarkable story, I want to thank our sponsors and supporters. If you're interested in more detailed military history content, check out the link in the description for our extended interviews with armor historians. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Now let's see what happened to Sergeant Yegorov and how his improvised solution changed armored warfare forever. The war ends on May 8, 1945. Sergeant Nikolai Yegorov receives the Order of the Red Star for his innovation, but he never seeks recognition beyond that. Post-war interviews describe him as embarrassed by attention, insisting he just did what needed doing. He returns to Stalingrad, rebuilt and renamed Volgograd, and works in the same tractor factory until his retirement in 1973. He dies in 1989, age 67, having never spoken publicly about his wartime service. But his legacy transforms armored warfare. The Soviet Union adopts spaced armor as standard equipment on all post-war tank designs. The T-54, entering production in 1946, incorporates proper standoff armor based on Yegorov's principle. The T-55, T-62, and T-72 all feature increasingly sophisticated versions of the concept. The production numbers tell the story of widespread adoption. Between 1945 and 1950, the Red Army retrofits over 12,000 tanks with factory-manufactured screen armor. The system becomes known officially as anti-cumulative screens, though veterans always call them Yegorov's fence. The design spreads to Warsaw Pact armies, then to Western forces studying captured Soviet equipment. Modern main battle tanks universally employ spaced armor concepts. The American M1 Abrams uses composite armor with air gaps. The British Challenger 2 employs Chobham armor, incorporating spacing principles. The Israeli Merkava features modular armor with deliberate standoff distances. Every system traces its conceptual lineage to a Soviet sergeant welding bed springs in a Berlin garage. The testimonials from saved lives span decades. Lieutenant Volkov, who survived the war and retired as a colonel, wrote in his memoirs, "Yegorov never understood that he was a genius. He thought he was just a welder doing his job. But I was in that tank when the Panzerfausts hit. I felt the explosions that should have killed us. Because of Nikolai's bed springs, I came home to my family. Hundreds of us came home." Major Sokolov, promoted to general by war's end, stated in a 1967 interview, "The greatest innovations often come from the bottom up, from men who see problems clearly because they face them directly. The main armored directorate had brilliant engineers, but none of them were burning alive in Berlin streets. Yegorov was. That made all the difference." The moral lesson resonates across military history. Bureaucracy values credentials, procedures, and established methods. Survival values results. The gap between these priorities costs lives until someone brave enough bridges it. Yegorov possessed no engineering degree, no formal training in armor design, no authority to modify military equipment. He possessed only the clarity of purpose that comes from watching friends die, and the courage to act when action violates regulations. The bed springs that looked absurd on April 19, 1945, saved 1,800 lives by May 8th. The principle dismissed as impossible by Moscow's experts remains standard on every tank rolling off production lines 80 years later. Sometimes the most important innovations come not from laboratories, but from desperate men with welding torches and the courage to try something new.